So who better than to speak to us about big magic than Elizabeth Gilbert?
Hey, this book just came out today, and I'm really nervous. It is such a vulnerable thing to make a thing and put it in the world, and it doesn't matter how many times you do it. It's a new experience every single time, and every single time it has an unknown outcome, and every single time it's scary. And that is what this book is about, and it's still scary that it's about that. What I wanted to write about was what it means to live a creative life that is not based on torment and suffering and martyrdom and angst, but on a joyful collaboration with the mysteries of inspiration, which is, I think, is the highest and most interesting way a human being can spend a life. The other part of it is that ever since I gave that TED Talk back in 2009, which some of you may have seen, it's like I hung a sign around my neck that said, please come to me with your questions and anxieties about creativity. And I'm glad, because I actually have enjoyed those conversations enormously. And what I've learned is that when you talk to people, there are people who are making and doing very interesting things out there. And then there are people who want to be making and doing very interesting things. And they have ideas and they have inspiration, and they're not making those things. And so, of course, I immediately start to grill them as to why they are not making those things. And they always have really articulate reasons for why they aren't doing that work. And the reasons are real, because the reasons are always real. You know, there's financial difficulties, there's family problems, there's the questions of time, there's living in the wrong city, having the wrong training, not having the right collaborators. There's always very good reasons that they can lay out almost in a legal document about why they are not engaging with creativity. But when I start to scratch at those reasons, it's always fear. So I'm going to skip into the beginning of the book, not the beginning, but the beginning-ish beginning. I'm a writer. I'm very articulate about where things are. So this, I believe, is the central question upon which all creative living hinges. Do you have the courage to bring forth the treasures that are hidden within you? Look, I don't know what's hidden within you. You may barely know it yourself, although I suspect that you've caught glimpses. I don't know your capacities, your aspirations, your longings, your secret talents, but surely something wonderful is sheltered inside you. I say this with all confidence because I happen to believe that we are all walking repositories of buried treasure. I believe this is one of the oldest and most generous tricks that the universe plays on us human beings, both for its own amusement and for ours. The universe buries strange jewels deep within us all and then stands back to see if we can ever find them. The hunt to uncover those jewels, that's creative living. The courage to go on that hunt in the first place is what separates a mundane existence from a more enchanted one. And the often surprising results of that hunt, that's what I call big magic. You get the branding. See how it all wraps around. All right, I won't interrupt myself again. When I talk about creative living here, please understand that I'm not necessarily talking about pursuing a life that is professionally or exclusively devoted to the arts. I'm not saying that you must become a poet who lives on a mountaintop on Greece, or that you've got to perform at Carnegie Hall, or that you have to win the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. Though if you want to attempt any of those feats, have at it. I love watching people swing for the bleachers. No, when I refer to creative living, I'm speaking far more broadly. I'm talking about living a life that is driven more strongly by curiosity than by fear. One of the coolest examples of creative living I've seen in recent years, for instance, came from my friend Susan, who took up figure skating when she was 40 years old. To be more precise, she actually already knew how to skate. She had competed in figure skating as a child and had always loved it, but she quit the sport during adolescence when it became clear that she didn't have quite enough talent to be a champion. For the next quarter of a century, my friend Susan didn't skate. Why bother if you can't be the best? And then she turned 40. She was listless, restless. She felt drab and heavy. She did a little soul searching the way you do on the big birthdays. She asked herself when was the last time she had felt utterly light, joyous, and yes, creative in her own skin. To her shock, she realized it had been decades since she had felt that way. In fact, the last time she'd experienced such feelings had been as a teenager, back when she was still figure skating. She was appalled to discover that she had denied herself this life-affirming pursuit for so long, and she was curious to see if she still loved it. So she followed her curiosity. She bought a pair of skates, found a rink, hired a coach. She ignored the voice within her that told her she was being self-indulgent and preposterous to do this thing. She tamped down her feelings of extreme self-consciousness at being the only middle-aged woman on the ice with all those tiny, feathery 9-year-old girls. She just did it. 3 mornings a week, she awoke before dawn, and in the groggy hour before her demanding day job began, she skated. And she skated and skated and skated, and yes, she did love it as much as ever. She loved it perhaps even more, because now as an adult, she finally had the perspective to appreciate the value of her own joy. Skating made her feel ageless. She stopped feeling like she was nothing more than a consumer, nothing more than the sum of her daily obligations and duties. She was making something of herself, making something with herself. It was a revolution, a literal revolution, as she spun to life on the ice, revolution upon revolution upon revolution. Please note that my friend did not quit her job, did not sell her home, did not sever all her relationships and move to Toronto to study 70 hours a week with an exacting Olympic-level skating coach. And no, the story doesn't end with her winning any medals. It doesn't have to. In fact, this story doesn't end because Susan is still figure skating several mornings a week, simply because skating is still the best way for her to unfold a certain transcendence within her life that she cannot seem to access in any other manner. And she would like to spend as much time as possible in such a state of transcendence while she's still here on Earth. That's all. That's what I call creative living. And while the paths and the outcomes of creative living will vary wildly from person to person, I can guarantee you this: a creative life is an amplified life. It's a bigger life, a happier life, an expanded life, and a hell of a lot more interesting life. Living in this manner, continually and stubbornly bringing forth the jewels that are hidden within you, is a fine art in and of itself, because creative living is where the big magic will always abide. So let's talk about courage now. If you already have the courage to bring forth the jewels that are hidden within you, terrific. You're probably already doing really interesting things with your life and you don't need this book. Rock on. But if you don't have the courage, let's try to get you some, because creative living is a path for the brave. We all know this. And we all know that when courage dies, creativity dies with it. We all know that fear is a desolate boneyard where our dreams go to desiccate in the hot sun. This is common knowledge. Sometimes we just don't know what to do about it. So let me list for you some of the many ways in which you might be afraid to live a more creative life. You're afraid you have no talent. You're afraid you'll be rejected or criticized or ridiculed or misunderstood or, worst of all, ignored. You're afraid there's no market for your idea and therefore no point in pursuing it. You're afraid somebody else already did it better. You're afraid everybody else already did it better. You're afraid somebody will steal your ideas, so it's safer to keep them hidden forever in the dark. You're afraid you won't be taken seriously. You're afraid that your work isn't politically, emotionally, or artistically important enough to change anybody's life and therefore not worth doing. You're afraid your dreams are embarrassing. You're afraid that someday you'll look back on your creative endeavors as having been a giant waste of time, effort, and money. You're afraid you don't have the right kind of discipline. You're afraid you don't have the right kind of workspace or financial freedom or empty hours in which to focus on exploration and invention. You're afraid you don't have the right kind of degree. You're afraid you're too fat. I don't know what this has to do with creativity, but pretty much everyone is afraid they're too fat. And it seems to stop them from doing a lot of interesting things, so let's put that on the anxiety list for good measure. You're afraid of being exposed as a hack or a fool or a dilettante or a narcissist. You're afraid of unleashing your innermost demons, and you really don't want to encounter your innermost demons. You're afraid that your best work is behind you. You're afraid you never had any best work to begin with. You're afraid you neglected your creativity for so long that you'll never get it back. You're afraid you're too old. You're afraid you're too young. You're afraid because something went well in your life once, and obviously nothing can ever go well twice. You're afraid because nothing has ever gone well in your life, so why should it begin now? You're afraid of being a no-hit wonder. You're afraid of being a one-hit wonder. Listen, I don't have all day here, so I'm not going to keep listing fears. It's a bottomless list and a depressing one. I will just wrap up my summary this way. Scary, scary, scary. Everything is so goddamn scary. And please understand that the only reason I can speak so authoritatively about fear is that I know it so intimately. I know every inch of fear from head to toe. I've been a frightened person my entire life. I was born terrified. I'm not exaggerating. You can ask anyone in my family and they will confirm that yes, I was an exceptionally freaked out kid. My earliest memories are of fear, and pretty much all the memories that come after my earliest memories are also of fear. Growing up, I was afraid not only of all the commonly recognized and legitimate childhood dangers like the dark and strangers and the deep end of the swimming pool, I was also afraid of an extensive list of perfectly benign things: snow, nice babysitters, cars, playgrounds, stairs, Sesame Street. the neighborhood, telephones, board games, the grocery store, sharp blades of grass, any new situation, anything that dared to move. I was a sensitive and easily traumatized creature who would fall into fits of weeping at any disturbance in her force field. My father, exasperated, named me Pitiful Pearl. We went to the Delaware shore one summer when I was 8 years old, and the ocean upset me so much that I begged my parents to stop all the people on the beach from going into the surf. I just would have felt a lot more comfortable if everyone had safely stayed on their own towel, quietly reading with their back to the ocean as I was. Was that too much to ask? If I'd had my way, I would have spent that entire vacation, indeed my entire childhood, indoors, on my mother's lap, in low light, with a cool washcloth on my forehead. This is a horrible thing to say, but here it goes. I probably would have loved having one of those awful Munchausen syndrome by proxy mothers who colludes and pretends that their child is sick to get attention. I would have completely cooperated with that kind of a mother in pretending that I was sick, weak, and dying, in creating a completely helpless child, given half the chance. But I didn't get that kind of mother, not even close. Instead, I got a mother who wasn't having it. She wasn't having a minute of it, which is probably the luckiest thing that ever happened to me. My mom grew up on a farm in Minnesota, the proud product of tough Scandinavian immigrants, and she was not about to raise a little candy ass on her watch. My mother had a plan for turning around my fear that was almost comic in its straightforwardness. At every turn, she made me do exactly what I dreaded the most. Scared of the ocean? Get in the ocean. Afraid of the snow? Time to shovel the snow. All the neighbors' snow that year, I remember. Can't answer the telephone? You're now officially in charge of answering the telephone in this house. Hers was not a psychologically sophisticated strategy, but it was consistent. And I resisted her. I cried and sulked and deliberately failed. I refused to thrive. I lagged behind, limping and trembling. I would do almost anything to prove that I was emotionally and physically totally enfeebled, to which my mom was like, "No, you're not." I spent years pushing back against my mother's unshakable faith in my strength and abilities. And then one day, somewhere in adolescence, I finally realized that this was a really weird battle for me to be fighting. Defending my weakness? That's seriously the hill I wanted to die on? As the saying goes, argue for your limitations and you get to keep them. Why would I want to keep my limitations? I didn't, as it turned out. I don't want you keeping yours either. Over the years, I've often wondered what finally made me stop being Pitiful Pearl almost overnight. Surely there were many factors involved in the evolution of this, the tough mom factor, the growing up factor, but mostly I think it was this. I finally realized that my fear was boring. Mind you, my fear had always been boring to everyone else, but it wasn't until mid-adolescence that it became at last boring even to me. My fear became boring to me, I believe, because I finally noticed that it was the same thing every single day. Around the age of 15, I somehow figured out that my fear had no variety, no depth, no substance, no texture. I noticed that my fear never changed, never delighted, never offered a surprise ending or an unexpected twist. My fear was a song with only one note, only one word, actually, and that word was stop. My fear never had a single more interesting or subtle thing to offer than that one word, repeated at full volume on endless loop, stop, 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 which means that my fear always made particularly boring decisions, like a choose-your-own-ending book that always had the same ending, which was nothing. I also realized that my fear was boring because it was identical to everybody else's fear. I figured out that everyone's song of fear has exactly the same tedious lyric, stop, 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 stop. True, the volume may vary from person to person, but the song never changes because all of us humans were equipped with the same basic fear package when we were being knitted in our mother's wombs. And not just humans. If you pass your hand over a petri dish containing a tadpole, the tadpole will flinch reflexively beneath your shadow. That tadpole cannot write poetry, and it cannot sing, and it will never know love or jealousy or triumph, and it has a brain the size of a punctuation mark, but it damn sure knows how to be afraid of the unknown. Well, so do I. So do we all, but there's nothing particularly compelling about that. Do you see what I'm saying? You don't get any special credit for knowing how to be afraid of the unknown. Fear is a deeply ancient instinct and an evolutionarily vital one, but it's not particularly smart. For the entirety of my young and skittish life, I had fixated upon my fear as if it were the most interesting thing about me, when in fact it was the most mundane. In fact, my fear was probably the only 100% mundane thing about me. I had creativity within me that was original. I had a personality within me that was original. I had dreams and perspectives and aspirations that were original. But my fear was not original in the least, My fear was not some kind of rare artisanal object. It was a mass-produced item available on the shelves of any generic box store. And that's the thing that I wanted to build my entire identity around, the most boring instinct I possess, the panic reflex of my dumbest inner tadpole? No. Now you probably think I'm going to tell you that you must become fearless in order to live a more creative life, but I'm not going to tell you that because I don't believe it's true. Creativity is a path for the brave, but not a path for the fearless, and it's important to recognize the distinction. Bravery means doing something scary. Fearlessness means not even understanding what the word scary means. If your goal in life is to become fearless, I believe you're already on the wrong path, because the only truly fearless people I've ever met were straight-up sociopaths and a few exceptionally reckless 3-year-old children, and those are not good role models for any of us. The truth is you need your fear for obvious reasons of basic survival. Evolution did well to install a fear reflex within you, because if you didn't have any fear, you would lead a short, stupid, crazy life. You would walk into traffic, you would drift off into the woods and be eaten by bears, you would jump into giant waves off the coast of Hawaii despite being a poor swimmer, you would marry a guy who said on the first date, "I don't necessarily believe people were designed by nature to be monogamous." I don't know where I got that one. So yes, you absolutely do need your fear in order to protect you from actual dangers like the ones I have listed above, but you do not need your fear in the realm of creative expression. Sincerely, you do not. Just because you don't need your fear when it comes to creativity, of course, doesn't mean that your fear won't show up. Trust me, your fear will always show up, especially when you're trying to be innovative. Your fear will always be triggered by your creativity, because creativity asks you to enter into realms of uncertain outcome, and fear hates realms of uncertain outcome. Your fear, programmed by evolution to be hypervigilant and insanely overprotective, will always assume that any uncertain outcome is destined to end in a bloody, horrible death. Basically, your fear is like a mall cop who thinks he's a Navy SEAL. He hasn't slept in days, he's all hopped up on Red Bull, and he's liable to shoot at his own shadow in an absurd effort to keep everyone safe. This is all totally natural and human. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It is, however, something that very much needs to be dealt with. Here's how I've learned to deal with my fears. I made a decision a long time ago that if I want creativity in my life, and I do, then I will have to make space for fear too. Plenty of space. I decided that I would need to build an expansive enough interior life that my fear and my creativity could coexist, since it appeared that they would always be together. In fact, it seems to me that my fear and my creativity are basically conjoined twins, as evidenced by the fact that my creativity cannot take a single step forward without fear marching along beside it. Fear and creativity, it seems, shared the womb. They were born at the same time. They still share major vital organs. This is why we have to be careful about how we handle our fear, because I have observed that when people try to kill off their fear, they usually end up inadvertently murdering their creativity in the process. So I don't try to kill my fear. I don't go to war against it. Instead, I make all that space for it, heaps of space every single day. I'm making space for fear right this moment. I allow fear to live and breathe and stretch out its legs comfortably. It seems to me that the less I fight my fear, the less it fights back. If I relax, it relaxes too. In fact, I cordially invite fear to come along with me everywhere I go. I even have a welcoming speech prepared for fear, which I deliver right before embarking on any new project or big adventure. And it goes like this. Dearest fear, creativity and I are about to go on a road trip. I understand you'll be joining us. Because you always do. I acknowledge that you believe you have an important job to do in my life and you take your job seriously. Apparently your job is to induce complete panic in me whenever I'm about to do anything interesting. And may I say, you are superb at your job. So by all means, keep doing your job if you feel you must, but I will also be doing my job on this road trip, which is to work hard and stay focused. And creativity will be doing its job, which is to remain stimulating and inspiring. There's plenty of room in the minivan for all of us, so make yourself at home, but understand this. Creativity and I are the only ones who will be making any decisions along the way. I recognize and I respect that you're part of this family. I will never exclude you from our activities, but still, your suggestions will not be followed. You are allowed to have a seat, you're allowed to have a voice, but you are not allowed to have a vote. You don't get to touch the roadmaps, you're not allowed to suggest detours, you're not allowed to fiddle with the temperature. Dude, you're not even allowed to choose the freaking snacks. But above all else, my dear old familiar friend, you are absolutely forbidden to drive. And then we head off together, me and creativity and fear, side by side, forever, marching once more into the terrifying but marvelous terrain of unknown outcome. Why Is this worth it? It isn't always comfortable or easy carrying your fear around with you on your great and ambitious road trips, but it's always worth it. Because if you can't learn to travel comfortably alongside your fear, then you will never be able to go anywhere or interesting or do anything interesting. And that would be a pity, because your life is short and rare and amazing and miraculous, and you want to do really interesting things and make really interesting things while you're still here. I know that's what you want for yourself, because that's what I want for myself too. It's what we all want. And you have treasures hidden within you, extraordinary treasures, and so do I, and so does everyone around us. And bringing forth those treasures to light takes work and faith and focus and courage and hours of devotion, and the clock is ticking and the world is spinning, and we simply do not have time anymore to think so small. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.